So excited to be wrapping up our content today with our great partners, Google. Google has been a NetApp partner and we've been friends for a really long time from an engineering perspective. So I'm really excited to be joined today by Sean Darrington and Dean Hildebrand. So I'm going to firstly, I guess, I'd ask you to introduce yourself, guys. So Sean, let's start with you. I guess a little bit about your history so that people know who you are and kind of where you're coming from.
Yeah, so Sean Darrington, product management at Google Cloud now, focusing on our storage solutions and do a lot of work with NetApp as a company and a partner of Google Cloud. Longtime storage industry, veteran 25 years, Veritas and Symantec and storage startup at Exablocks and so forth. This is my 7th tech field day with Stephen Foskett and team. And actually, Stephen and I did the very first tech field day way back when with Veritas and 3PAR on thin provisioning. So it's great to be back.
Yeah, and Dean, I'm really excited to have you because I talk all the time about NFS and file services and Google, obviously. And you have just such a history in that area. So maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dean Hildebrand. I'm in the Google office of the CTO. And I started school at an interesting time, right when we were redefining the NFS protocol around NFS 4. And so a lot of the work I did at that time was around scaling up NFS. And then a lot of those changes got into NFS 4.1 and then started defining the NFS 4.2 protocol as well at that time. So that was lots of fun. And then I went over to IBM Research and worked in primarily HPC storage there for over 10 years. And then eventually in their cloud storage offerings as well. And then now I'm at Google, like I said, I'm a technical director working on our file block and object storage strategy.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's great to have you both here today. Tech Field Day is not meant to date us, but it's so exciting to hear about the history and your backgrounds because I think that's what informs a lot of our future direction as well. So, Sean, you've seen the well, let's start with you. So we're talking about file services primarily in Google today and Google Cloud Storage as well. What are some of the use cases you're seeing for file in particular in Google Cloud today?
You know, it's a lot of the same things we see on premises, because as you were talking about earlier in the show this morning, you know, there are digital native companies that are born in the cloud, and then there are a lot of companies that are on premises coming to the cloud. And with the vast amount of data being unstructured on premises, it's a good opportunity to move it into the cloud and kind of keep that same structure. And sometimes you're going to rewrite applications and so forth. But you know, some of the main use cases around disaster recovery, right, and particularly with NetApp on premises replicating to NetApp CVO in the cloud, it's a good opportunity to get the data in synchronous modes between on-prem and cloud, failover capabilities, run compute and storage where is needed. A lot of the same verticals. We see a lot of success in financial services, retail, healthcare. Even EDA is an example, right? There are companies that are able to leverage NetApp on premises and have for years, but now they have the opportunity to leverage like CVO with FlexCache in the cloud for bursting workloads. So there's a different way that people can think about leveraging cloud assets as they continue to leverage on-premises assets. And you know, one of the other big things is healthcare. That we see a lot of companies using that, particularly around NetApp file services, where you know one company in particular is a global company. They have petabytes of NetApp file services across 80 different locations worldwide, and we're now in the process of centralizing all of that within 6 Google regions, and they're using NetApp CVO in Google Cloud with the combination of the edge cache that you heard earlier this morning, used to be global file cache, for the file serving. So now they're able to minimize their operational costs by getting rid of some of the hardware that was aging out already, but now they're actually leveraging a new way to manage that data more efficiently.
Right. So it's a lot of the the typical use cases for moving to the cloud and having the storage and having the file services available in the cloud just like they are on premises, and that the ease of not just setting them up, but I imagine managing them as well when you're trying to learn this whole new architecture of cloud, right?
Yep.
Okay. And is there something that customers look for in the cloud that they want because they're used to it on premises, or is there a change in the perspective of the way that they architect these environments?
I think it really, what we've seen is it really depends on where that company is in kind of their process of migrating to the cloud, whether it be an all or nothing, or they're moving and they have multi-year strategy to do this, because companies will run a combination of VMs on our compute engine. They may be rewriting applications for Kubernetes, which you heard about earlier this morning as well. or they may just want to continue to leverage VMware with GCVE. So it kind of depends on where they're coming from in terms of if they're going to think about things differently. But with CVO, they have all the bells and whistles that they're used to on premises, right? And they're able to leverage a lot of the same APIs to do some advanced things, or they may want to go down a fully managed storage route with Cloud Volume Service. So not all the features, but you're going to have some trade-offs in terms of ease of administration, directly integrate with the console versus kind of do it yourself. So it just depends on where companies are. We see it really across the board.
Yeah, right. It's that multi-cloud journey or the cloud journey that we talk about and where they are. Do you find that, like you mentioned, cloud native customers, do you find that they're leaning towards, and I don't know if either of you want to answer this, do you find that they're leaning towards file as a storage service, or is there preference there to, to use other things like object?
Yeah, I mean, we're big believers in using the right tool for the job, right? And so for whatever workload they have, right, they really need to use the specific storage service that meets their needs. And so, object and file have been on different journeys, I would say, over the last 5 years in cloud, where object is really trying to play to its core strengths around flexibility, scalability, and global access of the data. And then they really want to focus on their core use cases, which is around content distribution, data analytics, and data preservation. And so, and delivering all of that at a very, low cost. Whereas in file, it's been on its own journey where, all of the data management capabilities that exist on-prem, right? We've been moving them into cloud, making them easy to use, easy to consume, work for non-NetApp experts, right? That really just don't want to think about so much about the data management side and really want to focus on their applications. So, and we've had a lot of success there as well around delivering, dependable SLAs and RPO and RTO times and separating out IOPS and bandwidth from capacity in terms of how they buy these things. So, we've been a long way down that road, but the other thing that File has is a very specific API, right, around POSIX. It also has its own data sharing semantics that between different users, and then as well as a low latency performance access. So, something that you're much more similar to on-prem, and even when you're in the cloud, versus object, which is a much higher latency and really designed for larger objects. And so, when we talk to customers around what workloads they have and where they want to bring them, it's really about looking at those types of capabilities that the different services provide and, doing the match into each one of them, right? And both of them are, again, the first-class citizens in the cloud.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So, Sean, I want to kind of take a segue here, just because I think some of our viewers maybe aren't familiar with Google Cloud, and I know that you have other storage services. So we mentioned Google, object storage as well as file. Can you just maybe give a rundown of what those cloud storage services are in Google, just so that we are all on the same plane?
Yeah, so there's, depending on the application, again, there's a combination of object or block or file services that we have. Dean was talking about cloud storage. That's obviously our object storage, which is designed for the types of applications Dean was mentioning. It's also built on the infrastructure that we use for our other services in Google, like Photos and Gmail and other things called Colossus, which is really just a cluster file system that is planet scale. Persistent disk is our block storage offering. And there are a variety of persistent disk options based upon capacity and performance and compute size and so forth that people can choose to use in GCE or in other cases. And then File Store is our native, just our fully managed NFS storage service. It's a file storage service that customers can use. But one of the things with Google Cloud is that we do have an open ecosystem, and that's one of the reasons we've been partnering with NetApp for years, is that we want to do what's right for the customer. And not everything that Google has is going to be right for the customer, and so we try to figure out what that right option is based upon, in this case, file needs, and maybe it's File Store, but and sometimes it might be also CVO or it might be CVS from NetApp, and so that's really an approach that we have for an open partner ecosystem, in addition to backup services that we have that is integrated into the Cloud Console for us to provide, but we work with Veeam and Commvault and others as well, again, with that mindset of an open ecosystem.
Okay, yeah, and that's a really interesting, I want to kind of dive into, when you say an open ecosystem from a Google, what does that mean from Google Cloud? Does that mean that you let people build things on top of Google Cloud and then sell it through the Google console, or is there something more integrated than that?
Yeah, well, in this case, with NetApp and Google Cloud, it's more integrated than that. A lot of times, customers can, they can build and deploy things on their own in Google Cloud, and that's one way to do it. They can also buy things through the marketplace, which is one of the things that the two companies have a relationship with, and that oftentimes helps customers with how they're going to spend, how they're going to think about what kind of service levels are associated with support of those products that are in marketplace. And then, in the case of NetApp and Google Cloud right now, we actually have sales teams that are focused on selling each other's products, right? So, within NetApp, there's a team that's compensated for selling CVO or CBS in Google Cloud. And similarly, within Google Cloud, we have teams that are compensated on selling NetApp in Google Cloud. And so from that perspective, people can buy it through the marketplace and they can use, and they know that there's a joint support SLA associated with that.
Yeah, support's definitely one of the big ones for, I think, for customers, especially moving into the cloud, where it's the last thing you want to think about is who do I call if something's not working, right? So can you talk a little bit more about that relationship between Google and I think I'd like to hear from both of you about this, because I think there is both, like you mentioned, the sales partnership and the marketplace partnership, but there's also a pretty deep engineering partnership too. So Dean, maybe you could talk a little bit about what's that been like with NetApp over the last couple of decades?
Yeah, I mean, I think we started working together at an engineer-to-engineer level probably around 2017 or 18. And, things, I think, got really close and really, working as one team, right, to deliver the services that we have on the platform. Specifically, we built a brand new service with CVS where, it's a Kubernetes-based ONTAP service that, users can now use across our entire platform. And that really required both engineers sitting in the same room for over a year or 2 years, sitting down, talking to each other, working through all the issues, right, in terms of getting the technologies to work together, the networking, even right into the Kubernetes tech leads in order to modify the platform that we had in terms of adapting to some of the NFS and SMB needs that are requirements that are needed. And I think that's been rewarded on both sides in terms of we've had internal engineering awards given to teams inside of Google for the great partnership that we've had. I think the same thing has happened on the other side as well. And we've been have Partners of the Year awards together and all these different things. So I think that it's been a really productive and super amazing partnership where I think both engineers on both sides have learned a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the other thing, going forward, like the Google Cloud PMs and engineering and NetApp PMs and engineering on both sides, there's a lot of interaction almost on a daily, if not, weekly, if not daily basis on roadmap items. What are we going to do? And that really comes light in like Cloud Volume Services, right? It's directly integrated into Google Cloud's console. So customers don't have to install anything. They just, on the left-hand nav, can navigate down to Cloud Volume Service and choose a capacity and region and deploy it. But that's also leading into things that we're going to be bringing out in the future as well for prioritization about what are customers wanting. And so as we work in these joint opportunities with customers about their migration to the cloud, whether it be a migration or a hybrid deployment, it really influences from a product perspective, which features do we prioritize to deliver first based upon both teams' inputs and priorities.
Yeah, and so the other thing I want to touch on is you mentioned earlier, Sean, about how the sales teams are really tightly integrated. And I want to ask about Google Cloud approaching some of these workloads. What are you, when customers are coming to you and asking about migrating into Google Cloud, and one of the things that they have behind that is some storage requirement. What are some of the things that you're finding that the teams are able to do together to solve that customer or to get to the customer's requirements, requirements?
Well, I think, oftentimes the conversation with the customer is much bigger than I have a storage project. And so that's actually a good thing because that opens up the door for a lot of conversations, a lot of possibilities about what can we do in what scenario and how much can we do when. And then it really gets into a prioritization and planning perspective for what's the customer's most important priorities. Sometimes it's the data center evacuation. Sometimes it's I want to move this cloud, solve a DR problem. I need to get out of my second data center. I want to stay in my primary. I want to move different workloads to the cloud based upon my VMware, and I want to run that in GCBE, right? So it really just depends upon the priorities of the customers, but those conversations that are much broader than a specific storage project really opens the doors to bigger opportunities.
Sure. Okay. And I guess I want to kind of look into the future of those opportunities and where you see your customers what are those kinds of workloads that they're starting to lean towards? So they may have started with a backup or a DR workload, because that's a nice way to get started and to see what the cloud is like and if it's going to work for them. But what are they asking for you now, if we can get a little bit more specific?
Do you want to chime
Yeah,
in?
sure. I mean, I'll add in a few. I think to your point, right? I mean, I think it started off, everyone at some level on some workloads started off very slowly, making sure that everything's working right. And now I think we're seeing the transition to saying, well, actually, maybe I can either use the cloud as the first, the only existence for this workload instead of having to use it. But then a lot of others are saying, well, actually my gateway into cloud is through bursting. And so being able to burst out and put pipelines in that can burst out to cloud, leverage the compute resources inside of cloud. And then at the end of the day, they can quickly shut it all down. But then that becomes its own gateway into saying, well, okay, well, now that you're bursting, that requires a lot of data movement. That requires a lot of management from that side. What if we just moved everything into cloud on a per workload basis? And so now we are seeing design workstations coming up in the cloud, again, get access to GPUs and these types of things. And so a lot more of what did happen on the desktop, I think, is now happening inside the cloud. And that becomes the place of generation of the data. And then that becomes the place where they can now run, let's say, larger batch workloads or pipelines based on that created data, which then leads down through the entire pipeline. And so, I think that this evolution as the trust that we've been building over the last several years is starting to sort of reap the hybrid and the all-in type workloads. Anything to add, or no?
Well said.
Oh, well, there you go.
Well, I want to ask then, I mean, we started talking about file services, and you mentioned NFS and how it has been around for a really long time. How do you find that protocol is, what do you see happening with NFS? Is it reached its, its potential, or is there still more to come?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people confuse the implementation of a server or the implementation of an NFS client with the actual protocol itself, and it's a little bit confusing to know where one ends and one begins. And so a lot of people's perceptions of like, oh, this is NFS storage, it works this way, is more based on, on-prem, they use some version of it, or they had some old thing, or whatever they were doing. And so I think we're really, in cloud trying to change the mindset a little bit about saying, well, actually, this type of behavior isn't fixed towards the protocol, meaning like if you did want to set up a service and have it automatically grow over time as you, start easing data, you can do that with an NFS-based offering, right? There's a lot of different things you can do that are completely separate than the protocol, and I think we're discovering those as we go through this journey over the last several years to really say, well, what are the customer, like right now, they're really looking for that high level data protection, the data management services, and make sure that everything's safe. And, but I think once we get through all of that, it'll be a lot more around, okay, I have a global team. I need to access data from these different locations. I really need to figure out how to leverage the benefits of cloud to get my team working together and getting them leveraging all the cloud resources, as we talked before. Then that becomes the interesting questions to have. And like, I think at this point, we don't see any reason why NFS or SMB and whatever cannot, follow us along into that journey, again, to enable those key parts of the workloads and the APIs that people expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good thing to know as well, knowing I don't have to learn another skill.
Yeah, and if you want to, right, I think the key that we're trying to get across is like, if you want to learn and you want to use different aspects of things, go ahead, this is great. But don't feel like it's an obligation in order to take advantages of cloud and the flexibility and the scalability, right? That is like really want to separate out that file storage can, meet all of the needs and deliver on the promise of what cloud is out there delivering.
Yeah.
I think you guys are going to break the ice of
Please.
the U-shaped curve here.
Fantastic. We actually were enjoying that. It's a good intro to questions that can lead us in there. One of the things with storage and cloud, especially when you get into file storage, and the abstraction equals performance loss. No matter how you slice it, every layer of abstraction, there's a sense of inability to measure or get top performance. And we get distributed cloud storage, there's a fear that us on-prem folks right? Team bare metal. We love managed latency, controlled latency, and there's a sensation, human sensation, that we will lose that control or capability when we go to the cloud. Can we talk about what you're doing both with ONTAP and the partnership with NetApp to make sure that you can maintain those SLAs, SLOs, and that we don't just think it's going to get spread all over some data center and we're going to get these disturbing latencies that we can't point to? Because that's also the thing, is that we can go back and I can say, now I know what happened, but when I move to cloud-based storage, maybe I'm wrong. I lose that capability to get that observability to say, like, at this point in time, this specific thing happened, which spiked latency, which caused, second-tier cache problems. Right. I mean, I can go on all day about performance and cache. It's kind of a thing that's close to home for me, but that's a human problem that we love metal. We love to know that I can go, I can touch it, I can throw observability at it, and I can see exactly what happened when. And I feel like I lose that sometimes when I go to cloud-based services. No offense.
Yeah, if we were just talking about it, it's actually a trade-off, right? I mean, all of the, I shouldn't say all of it, but a lot of the NetApp admins on premises, they love to figure out how many spindles are going to be in a box, what's the ratio, what's the utilization, how many IOPS per spindle, how do I size it, what's the cache hit ratio, all that good stuff that everybody's used to doing.
Is it SATA? Is it SAS? I want to know.
Is it 5,400 RPM or 7,200 RPM? I'm going to save a few dollars by going with slower driving. Can I still get the IOPS I need out of it, right?
Deep, fire and wide, yeah.
It's one of those trade-offs that you don't have to worry about that anymore, right? So even if you're using CVO in Google Cloud, you're going to run that on persistent disk underneath the covers. You're going to run that on a compute size and instance type with X amount of vCPU and memory and so forth. And so you have to think about things differently as a service that you're almost subscribing to, and you can size that service how you'd like to. And there are SLAs that go along with those services, right? So like CVO is like a 4.9 SLA, and depending on how you deploy CVO in an HA pair, you can deploy that across 2 different zones within a region, and now you're actually increasing the level of nines availability that you can actually count on. And so we were just talking about that a little bit earlier, working on a project with a customer, and customers steeped in NetApp sizing, and it's like, well, that's not how it works on premises. And go through that explanation about it's a different way about thinking about a service you're actually going to run on, in this case, CVO in the cloud. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, I was just going to add that I think what that does, though, is it puts the onus on us to deliver, right? So to your point, right, is well, I'm going to get these crazy tail latencies or something to that effect. How do I know that I'm getting them, and how do I react when they occur? So I think that puts the onus on us to say, look, we're giving you this service, we should be open about what it actually is in the sense of what is its latency profile, what is its performance characteristics, how do you achieve those performance characteristics? So we publish benchmarks, for example, on our website to say, hey, look, you're not getting the right performance, run this. If you're still not getting, if it's not achieving it, that's a bug. And so we really try to build up this I think, partnership basically with customers and partners to say, if you're not achieving this, it's a bug. And they're like, whoa, wait a second, what do you mean a bug? I'm like, it's an actual bug. Like, open the bug because you're not getting it. And they're like, well, I just figured it was slow at this point. Yeah, it might be slow at this point, but that's not supposed to happen, right? It's going to happen, but it's not something that's supposed to. So I think that's where it really is about, sort of building that trust that the numbers we say you're going to get, and therefore, does it matter if it, is, SAS or SATA or has some sort of write back cache in the middle of it or whatever. I mean, as long as it's achieving, I think, the sort of promise that you care for. Plus the monitoring, which is, to your point of, I think that's something where cloud traditionally has done really well in terms of monitoring. But, to your point of like, well, I can monitor the higher level, but now I want more detailed. And I think that's something that we're evolving over time to add more and more granular statistics, IO latency profiles. The one thing that I've had people that are used to on-prem is say, like, I wrapped up a bunch of stuff together, I built a dashboard in 10 minutes, and now I'm observing the latencies of like all of my VMs. They're like, this would have taken me 2 days, with Grafana and all these other things before, and now I just sort of did it through some point and clicks.
And even be able to see like a specific workload that could get an extremely, terrifying cliff on the missed ratio curve, at a certain allocation level, like, oh, I could move that around. I could choose a better way in which I could allocate storage to that. But it's tough to get that visibility from the cloud consumer side.
Yeah, one example I was going to give is on our block storage as an example. We actually have a monitoring of how often you've hit the limit. And so you actually know whether or not you're hitting the limit or not. And if you are, then maybe you need to increase the size or pay for more IOPS or something along that side, right? Depending if you're unhappy about that. Because a lot of folks are like, no, I'm not hitting the limit, except, well, in fact, you have a very bursty workload and you just couldn't see it in the monitoring because it's not granular enough. And so, we try to build more and more of those types of metrics back to the.
Could you talk about, oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
Could you talk about, I love these stories about kind of like how the mindset has to change from being how we've had to do things and control them on-prem, and now we can control different things from a higher level. So do you have any more examples of customers that may have come to you with this same type of fear and how you've kind of been able to help them through that?
It's a good segue because Dean had mentioned like the onus is on us to deliver a service, right? And one of the services that we deliver really well are networking services. So there are over 130 points of presence where customers can get into the Google network. And that healthcare company I was talking about earlier, where we were sizing, removing multiple petabytes of filers across 80 locations. The original design was actually we were going to put a cloud volume edge cache at each of the locations. However, in the larger regional centers that they had, we are able to actually eliminate the edge cache altogether because they can get onto the network, just run it directly in the cloud. And so now the users' data is in the cloud in one of the 6 regions, and we replicate it across 2 regions for availability, but the users are getting it directly from the cloud and it's going right back down to the server. So you still have the Windows file serving experience, but you don't need an edge cache. And so that's one of the things that changed based on the sizing and some of the testing that we did from latencies about how close you are to the compute to the data, where we still had edge cache deployments in some of the sites, and that's the plan, but we actually were able to alter and actually improve what the customers are able to do.
Okay, I was actually going to ask about your edge cache and your remote sites, because what I'd really like to know is that going to grow? Because I think that's a distinctive quality that Google has, is that outreach to the edge. But it sounds from your response that you actually think is not going to grow if you're actually not seeing the demand for the cache.
Is what part of it going to grow?
So I was hoping you would tell me you're going to have more locations and more distributed clouds and things like that. But I wasn't hearing that in your response.
Yeah, so this case was actually, the customer had 80 locations. We are consolidating that into 6 Google Cloud regions. We have 34 Google Cloud regions today, and we've announced at least 9 others that we're building out over time. So we're going to continue to expand the number of regions that we are in, and consequently the number of regions that Cloud Volumes ONTAP or Cloud Volumes Service will be available, in addition to increasing the number of networking points of presence that we have. So our growth is certainly not slowing down in terms of our building out regional.
You announced last year 140 edge points around the world where you
It's a large number, but the Cloud Volume Edge Cache is different than the networking edge points that I was talking about. Right?
Oh, okay. Well, I was interested in the 140 edge points and how that would impact our customers, especially those with a distributed business environment.
Yeah, it really helps them just get into our network sooner, right? And then once you're on our network, it's all of our network. So you're not going through different providers. You're not going, so you have very predictable network performance, network latencies that you can size into how you architect the application.
Yeah, and do you see that growing? Because I come from a service provider's background, and 1 point in one city is not enough. You want multiple points in the city, regional areas, etc.
On the caches, I think there's 2,000 edge points out there on that are today, and that's a lot used for just, again, wherever you are, just to getting into the network, right? And the sooner you're in, as you said, then the better. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's large. So the real question becomes then is given, so one is giving the users the choice on, do you want to use that type of network and thing, or do you want to maybe save some and just use public internet in terms of how you want to access the different zones and regions? And then the second one is our strategy around, okay, well, now there's ways to push out into the edges and push into on-prem, right? In terms of the different offerings that we're building either on-prem or on edge sites as well, that then link into the sort of primary, 29 regions now that we have.
And is that exposed in NetApp? Can I control and see that in NetApp?
Yeah, well, maybe Sean, you could say how many regions and where is NetApp in Google Cloud?
Yeah, so Cloud Volumes on tap is available in, I think, every region, maybe less one. Like some of the newest ones, like as they come online, it takes a little bit of certification, but it's you can think of it basically everywhere. And then Cloud Volumes Service is in, I would say, probably 80% of our regions.
I really like what you both said actually there about to the edge, about how it kind of brings the edge closer to where your users are. And so we may never think about it as an edge and a core. We might just think of it as everything is the edge, and I can access my Google Cloud resources wherever I happen to be. And it may be over the public internet and it may be over a private, direct link, but it's going to be there and it'll be available when I need it, at the latency that I need it, with the performance that I need it. So that's excellent. It's a nice way of thinking about it, to change your perspective of what cloud looks like, what data centers look like.
Is the use case for backing as a CSI to GKE and that pattern in place? And I may be going outside the lines of where we are yet, but we didn't explore that use case yet. And I'm going to go all Kubernetes all the time now, if you give me a chance.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the Kubernetes use case a little bit. I guess, the first question I think is there a role for persistent storage in Kubernetes? I think the answer we all say is yes. But how does file look, and what happens to it, and how are we obviously Google is in GKE, but how are we working together with Google to make that easier for customers?
Yeah, actually, this feeds into some of the stuff we were going to talk about around like the future and where file is going, right? And so, so my earlier point before, I think we need to continue the journey on making it simple and easy to use and getting all of the enterprise management features that we know and love and making them cloudified, if you will, right? Flexible, scalable, globally accessible. But then I think the next trend is going to be much more specific variants of file storage in cloud for the different frameworks that are emerging, like Kubernetes, right? I think we spent the last 5 to 10 years at this point, integrating the two in terms of making them, CSI drivers and making them easy to sort of launch and hopefully abstracting away any of the sort of gory details. But I don't think we've done anything specific necessarily, in terms of the NFS protocol or in terms of the NFS client and other things to really adapt to per container requirements. And I think that is going to start to be a trend that we're going to see about, we're not just talking about a VM anymore, we're talking about very small microservices and how do we adapt to their needs, not to this VM's needs, if you will. And today we've tried to focus more at the abstract level because it's a little bit easier. But I think, two containers could have completely different needs running one right next to each other. And we need to start building storage that's going to adapt to those types of workloads and requirements. And some of them might be slow and large, and some of them might want really low latency and fast. And how do we co-locate apps like that, right? So I think that's like a really big evolution, and that I think will evolve over into serverless frameworks and all of the rest of the frameworks, like as we move forward, right? It's really sort of adapting to their needs, and we're going to start seeing these specializations of.
I think the idea of the container being able to to consume directly TPU, GPU, and high-speed storage for persistence that also allows for other things to happen to the data that's in the storage layer. We're going to see those real, true, scale-out, purpose-built. Like maybe this is, again, this panacea type of thing, but looking in the pharma use cases that folks that I've talked to, in media use cases where they're leveraging container-based services, but they need high-speed storage, they need some persistence, they need to run other data management algorithms and data checking on it. So it's got all the right things, but the only compute layer that can keep up with it is scale-out containers. And so I see that as there. So yeah, I'd be interested to see as time goes on where we can build applications that can use this stuff. Right now it's intellectual and in kind of goofy use cases, but it's if we can find someone to build it, then we'll be there.
That's such a